What happens when you bring a Greater Brass Scorpion to the best Warhammer 40,000 event on the entire planet? Well, that's exactly what I did last weekend when I attended No Retreat 13. Today we're going to be recapping that event, so grab yourselves a brew and let's dive into the video. Hello everyone and welcome back to the Red Path. My name is Dara and you are watching The Skull Takers, a video series where we recap tournaments and World Leader performances from all around the globe. Today I'm going to be talking about No Retreat 13, an invitational Warhammer 40,000 tournament hosted in Gibraltar by SN Battle Reports, which I attended last weekend. First and foremost, to kick this video off, I want to extend a massive thanks to all of our Patreons. It is pretty much entirely due to your support that I was able to attend this amazing event, as it is quite expensive, and I wouldn't have been able to do it without you. We generally use any financial support for tournament attendance, allowing us to go to cool events like this and make content about them. So it's with a deep gratitude to all of you that I am presenting this video. If you'd like to consider supporting us in any way and seeing more of this type of content, the links to our Patreon are down below. But as always, just watching the video, sharing and liking it is more than enough. Now, before we dive into the recap of the games that I played, it's very important to give some context around what No Retreat actually is, because it is completely different to any other Warhammer tournament. No Retreat is an invitational event, meaning there's a limited number of places and everyone who wants to go has to submit an application to SN Battle Reports. I'll have links in the video description which provide more information if you're interested, but the gist of it is that they're looking for armies which are visually stunning and players who are excellent ambassadors of all aspects of the hobby. The application process is extremely competitive and this year had more applicants than ever before. Some of the biggest names and most talented painters in the hobby have attended this event, and each year its prestige has grown, marking it as one of the premier tournaments to be part of. I submitted my application in October of last year, and I didn't expect to actually be accepted. No Retreat has been an event which I've always longingly wanted to attend, but in the past year I felt my painting had reached a level which warranted an application. However, knowing the general level of painting skill which is normally on display, I was shocked when I received an invite and naturally beyond delighted to accept a place there. Since then, I've been carefully considering what models and units I would bring which would accurately represent the story of my warband, the Cinder Host, and be visually impressive on the tabletop. No Retreat also focuses a lot more on the narrative of 40k, rather than aiming for a strictly competitive environment, which might seem off-putting to more competitively focused players, but as most of you know, I'm pretty competitively minded, and this event really appealed to me because of how different the rules and structure was. One big thing to note is that you are allowed to bring legend units at No Retreat, which completely changes things for the world leaders and greatly deepens the unit pool we have to choose from. Unsurprisingly, this massively affected my list design for the event, and longtime viewers will know my love affair with some of the more esoteric units that we previously had access to. The event itself is hosted on the Sunborn Super Yacht, a 5-star hotel that's docked in the Bay of Gibraltar. Need I say any more about how awesome that is? The boards that you play on are vastly different from standard tournaments, as SN eschews competitive layouts in favour of more narratively driven battlefields. Again, it's a big departure from the formulaic approach which most tournaments use, and honestly, I love it. There was seriously cool themes on every board, from crashed spaceships to lava planets, and it really helped create a deep sense of immersion and narrative, especially when all the armies were so beautiful too. Personally, I found that move away from the formulaic mirrored boards to be very exciting. It meant I couldn't have a specific movement strategy, and I had to spend time reading every board and working out a new game plan for every round. The asymmetric maps also made the role for attacker and defender really important, which I thought was really fun. Sure, it wasn't necessarily competitively balanced, but that's not really what No Retreat is about. Instead, it allowed the players to tell a narrative story during their games across war-torn wastelands which looked at home in the 41st millennium. Suffice to say, I did not miss the L-shaped city one little bit. But going back to the event itself, It is simultaneously vital and also almost impossible to describe the atmosphere and vibe of No Retreat. This, I think, is what makes it stand out so much from other tournaments that I have attended. You've got 26 people who put their blood, sweat and tears into creating beautiful armies, all gathered together to play games in an amazing location on epic boards. And when I think about it, the games themselves almost felt secondary to the actual event. SN brought us on excursions across Gibraltar, hosted a sculpting class with Anfarius, and even arranged a personal fitness session, which I most certainly did not attend due to too many pina coladas the night before. Because of all these extra activities, the games are much more spread out and take place across 3 days instead of 2. We started with game 1 on Friday evening, followed by a group barbecue, and then we played 2 games on Saturday, broken up by lunch and a dolphin safari, and another group dinner in the evening. On Sunday was 2 more games and army display and judging, followed by an awesome award ceremony. This really took away the time pressure and energy drain which normally occurs at standard tournaments, meaning everyone was generally in better spirits and the group activities really helped to bring us all together and make friends between those games. The result of all these elements coming together is essentially a retreat. Yes, there is a tournament aspect, and yes, there is an overall winner, but that's not really what the heart of the event is. Stephen Pardo, the head of SN Battle Reports, has a motto for No Retreat: may the hobby be the winner. And there is no better way to sum up the event, because ultimately that's what it was all about, the hobby. It was a culmination of all aspects of Warhammer, unifying gaming, painting, community and narrative in one central location. It created an atmosphere which was infectious, inspiring, and very wholesome. It motivated me and taught me new things, and if I'm completely honest, it has actually completely changed my perspective on the entire game and how I enjoy it. Part of the reason that we haven't had as much content as normal lately is that I was going through a bit of a slump with the hobby and lacking a distinct purpose and drive, but now that No Retreat is behind me, I can feel that hunger again. Ordinarily, when I return from a 40k event, I usually take some time off the hobby to decompress, but this feels completely different. I can't wait to sit back down and start painting again. And you all know that I love attending tournaments, but this event was, for me at least, the perfect representation of what 40k should be. And while I always love a good competitive game, my heart is never fully in the chase for the podium, and I think No Retreat was definitely a representation of the type of event I want to attend. And there's no way that my description here even comes close to actually doing it justice. It really has to be experienced to be truly understood. When I arrived at Gibraltar, I said to my fiancée Audrey, I would do No Retreat once, and that would be it. Now, well, let's just say I've done a complete 180 on that opinion. So if this sounds like something you would like to be part of, then check out the links below. Read up on the event and consider applying when SN put out the call. I promise you, if you get the invite, you won't regret it. Never have I left an event having made so many new friends, having been inspired so much, or having near as much fun. But let's move on and start talking about the list that I brought and the games that I played. When it came to designing my army list for No Retreat, I was faced with a unique set of challenges unlike any other tournament. With such an emphasis on narrative and visual interest, I had to pick a selection of units which worked together and were representative of my best painting ability. Of course, with the allowance of legend units, this further complicated the matter and inevitably led to my choosing the Greater Brass Scorpion as a keystone unit in the list. I wanted to build an army for this which fit the current lore development for the Cinderhost, my own warband, so I hope you don't mind that I give a bit of background lore which might provide some context for my eventual list design. So with the former warband leader, Macrolord, dead, and Kem Gregor, the last sinner, leading a crusade of vengeance and redemption through the Hades Gate cluster, I figured I would theme the army around what happened after they reconquered this area. And having seized several forge worlds, the Cinderhost had been putting their thralls and slaves to work in the foundries, turning out war gear, armor, and new demon engines. In the heart of the Bloodforge, the Dark Mechanicus created an abomination named Azalith, a titanic walker with bristling weaponry and an unquenchable thirst for the blood of psychers. Reinforced with these new demon engines, the Cinderhost struck out from Hades' Gate on a path of conquest and redemption. So with that loose concept in mind, I designed a list to suit the narrative. The list itself was titled Beasts of the Bloodforge. It's led up by the warlord, Kem Gregor, former Dark Apostle of the Cinderhost and now condemned to forever walk as an exile and penitent known as the Last Sinner. He's a demon prince on foot, with the Helm of Brazen Ire enhancement, meaning he halves all damage. And he provides great defensive boost to my army in the form of an invulnerable save for my infantry, which really helps my Exalted 8 band last a little bit longer, since he modifies their invuln to a 4+. He also has a cool trick, which we as a community have collectively dubbed Rotate Jackal Shields, which, when an infantry unit uses the go to ground stratagem near him, it ends up giving them a 4-up invulnerable save as well. Alongside him is the Firekeeper, my Lord Invocatus proxy. As the bearer of the Warband's standard, the title of Firekeeper is given to an anonymous warrior who takes up the flag and armour whenever their predecessor is slain. The current Firekeeper is relatively new to the role, having taken up the banner after Macrolor's defeat in his duel with the Primarch Angron. He's really useful, thanks to the scout ability he gives to 2 infantry units, allowing me to either create pressure on my opponent quickly, or reposition into cover if I need to. Then we have the Pitmaster, my Master of Executions with Berserker Glaive. An ancient warrior called up to service following the Warband's decimation, he has now taken up a leading role to be a figurehead in these dark times and ensure the Cinderhost does not completely collapse. As every World Eater player knows, you simply can't leave home without the Mo and Berserker Glaive. He's so brutal in combat, and his fight first ability gives you some really interesting tools to use on the table. Moving on to the battle line units, we start off with the iconic duo of Jackal units. Longtime viewers of the channel know and love them, but we have Barney and Philip once again leading their pack of miscreants into battle. We then have a single squad of berserkers accompanying the Pitmaster, and many of these are veterans of Macrolor's defeat, still wearing their broken, shattered armour as a memory of that day. Their hearts burn with vengeance and shame in equal parts, and are kept in line only by the firm words of their master. Moving into the elite section, we have 2 units of Exalted 8 band, one of 6 and one of 3. The 6-man unit is, of course, the Entombed, warriors who have fallen to complete madness due to the Butcher's Nails and demonic possession, unleashed now in this desperate time when the Cinderhost faces extinction. They are accompanied by 3 of the Revenants of the Charnel Pit, the last survivors of Macrolor's personal guard. Finally, we have the newly awakened Beasts of the Bloodforge. The first of these is a vicious bloodslaughter with an impaler harpoon, one of many scuttling creatures which were among the first to emerge from the fiery depths. Then there's Azalith, matriarch of the Bloodforge, Empress of Witchslayers, my greater brass scorpion. And with the Bloodforge spewing out abominations like this and led by Kem Gregor, surely nothing could possibly stand in the way of victory. At least that's what I thought anyway, but let's be real here. The list is pretty bad from a competitive viewpoint. It's got very little ability to score, a low unit count, and centers on a somewhat overcosted Titanic unit which isn't particularly difficult to kill. But damn, it looks pretty awesome on the table, and it feeds into my headcanon, and that's really important to me. And the fact that I could bring this list to No Retreat and know that, despite its shortcomings, I would still have a really good time speaks volumes about the event and the people attending. Because the reality of the situation is that everyone brought something crazy like this. There was no meta lists, no one arrived with the sole intention of winning the event. Our creativity was expressed not just in how we painted our models, but in how we composed our armies as well. Where ordinarily people may have laughed at such a silly list that I was bringing, at No Retreat it was simply par for the course. I didn't want to win the event, I wanted to tell cool stories with my models and get a chance to use some toys which have never seen the table before. So let's move on to talking about those battles and the stories that unfolded throughout the games. For all of my games, I'm going to leave the Instagram handle of my opponents in the video, and I recommend that if you're looking for some inspirational models, you check these out because they all have visually amazing armies. Before the first round, we had an awesome sculpting class with Anfarius, which taught me a lot about green stuff and honestly completely changed my perspective on modeling in general. It gave me newfound confidence to tackle this skill, which has always been very daunting to me. So expect to see a lot more customization from me in the future, and thanks to Baz for delivering an incredible class. Game 1 saw me playing into Stephen Barron, someone who I had sort of known in the background for having a gorgeous World Eater army, and many of you are probably familiar with his work. He brought his Grey Knights to No Retreat, which were lovingly converted and painted in a way which honestly represented the Grey Knights far better than the current model range does. And we were playing on a really cool crashed spaceship map, which provided some interesting angles and sightlines for both of our armies, as well as being relatively open, so the Scorpion could move around. To be honest, the Scorpion doesn't have a lot of good matchups, but into the Grey Knights, it's a bit rude. With the 4-up Feel No Pain against psychic damage and mortal wounds, which can be boosted to a 3-up with the blood dice, it's pretty much guaranteed to be a bulwark against the Silver Tide. But with that said, Stephen gave me a really good fight, and the game was by no means an easy one. I went second and essentially pushed up and staged as much as possible in turn 1, putting the Scorpion straight into the middle, where I knew it would be able to lock down a huge area of the board thanks to its rapid movement and brutal combat output. However, I made a crucial mistake when I was positioning my Exalted 8-band, which Stephen capitalized perfectly on in his turn 2 after having a similarly passive turn 1. He actually picked up his entire remaining army at the end of my turn and put it in deep strike, along with the rest of the force which was already there. Then in turn 2, he teleported in with a Death Star of 2 Paladin units, 2 Dread Knights, Drago and his Terminators, 2 Librarians, facing down Invocatus, the Exalted 8-band, and my Bloodslaughter, who all got absolutely vaporized. Another squad teleported in on my home field and mulched a lot of my Jackals, but crucially, left Philip alive. Losing my entire brick of Exalted without them ever making combat was a massive mistake and a huge blow, and I immediately felt like I was on the ropes and needed to make some plays. Thankfully, the Scorpion saved the day here. Because it's so large, I was able to retaliate by charging into 3 different Terminator units and tagging them all, meaning they couldn't teleport away at the end of my turn. Meanwhile, my 3 Exalted 8-band deep struck in and cleared out his home field objective, which provided me with some good scoring, while my 10 Zerks had managed to basically lock down the bottom quarter of the board. The following turn saw my Scorpion slowly chewing through the Terminators and Paladins, while the Dread Knights tried to teleport around and do as much work as possible, but the Scorp did manage to one-shot one of them with its Demolisher Cannon. Thankfully, due to the Scorpion resilience and brutal combat output, I was able to lock down enough of Stephen's army for long enough so that I could outscore him, which finished with an 87-53 victory to me. Stephen was an incredible good sport and an absolute joy to play against. We shared a lot of laughs but still had a very tactical game, and he went on to finish in 3rd place, which was an awesome achievement and I was so delighted for him. Despite the uphill battle that he was facing, he met it with a smile and in the end played exceptionally well and put me in a really difficult spot to fight out of, so props to Stephen for that. Game 2 took place on Saturday morning after a night of good food and rest, and I was facing into Travis and his Custodes. Travis's army was gorgeous and genuinely looked like it had stepped out of some sort of fantasy graphic novel. His basing in particular was stunning, and his converted jet bike unit was just, oh, it was so cool. As you'll see, when it came to taking pictures of this game, I was particularly enamored by that unit. His list was pretty cool too, since aside from including an unusual jet bike unit, it also had a Telemon Dreadnought, something I haven't seen since 9th edition. There were some staples in here of course, 2 Warden bricks, a Guard brick, some Terminators, and all the characters that us World Eater players know and hate. I knew this one was going to be a little bit tricky, but little did I know just how close it was going to get. We were playing on a cool ruined town style board, and I ended up going first here. And I was a little bit overly aggressive, pushing up the Scorpion quite far just to take some pot shots at his Guard unit, and only killed a single one. The rest of my army staged, and I positioned in a way where if he charged into the Scorpion, I would have multiple units including Mo to heroically intervene or present some challenging interrupts of combat. I spread the rest of the army out and staged, essentially baiting in the Custodes without pushing too hard. Travis hit back by pushing in and going for an uppercut into the Scorpion, setting up to charge his Guard brick, a Warden brick, the jet bikes and the jet bike captain, all into the one unit. He also pushed the other Wardens up so that they could get into my Jackals. And it was about that time just after Travis failed his charge roll into the Scorpion with a guard unit, that we remembered we were playing Fog of War. So not only could he not reroll the charge, but I also couldn't heroically intervene or combat interrupt. Ultimately though, this worked out worse for him than me, since without that hyper lethal guard unit getting in, he wasn't likely to kill the Scorpion, especially when I put -1 damage on it. The Scorpion on the swingback actually picked up the entire unit of jet bikes due to Travis having some really terrible luck with the dice. And this weirdly put me in a good position for turn 2, despite Travis taking the midfield with a unit of Wardens and his Telemon. So I pushed hard, sending my Slaughter and Invocatus into the midfield at the Wardens. I put my Exalted 8-Bound and Demon Prince into the Telemon, and my Berserkers went into the Wardens on the flank that were in combat with the Scorpion. I knew I needed a really powerful offensive turn here, or else Travis would capitalize on my early mistake and push me out of the mid. It was a bit of a mixed bag here. My Exalted and Prince took the Telemon down to 1 wound, but crucially didn't kill it, while the Slaughterer got killed on the Warden interruption, and Invocatus only managed to take down 2 of them thanks to their Feel No Pain. The Berserkers similarly struggled with their Wardens, though the Mo did slap the Blade Champion into next year, but in the end there was 3 of them alive. And these 3 managed to kill the Scorpion, which hilariously fought on death and then killed them. The result was that I had crippled Travis in many places, but hadn't really managed to do enough damage to be in a confident position where I could push him in my next turn. And Travis retaliated very well, bringing Terminators and Wardens into the mid, while his guard went into Mo's squad. The brawl which followed was a brutal melee tug of war, essentially all over the middle objective. We tore chunks out of each other, and the Telemon heroically held out for long enough while whittling down my units. His Wardens mulched my 8-Bound, who fought on death and mulched the Wardens. My Demon Prince dueled Terminators, and my deep striking 8-Bound unit cleared his home field. It was so unbelievably brutal on both sides, and even though it was the first game of the day, both myself and Travis could feel our brains melting. In the end, it came down to Travis's final turn. I had scored out my turn 5, achieving a total of 54 points, and Travis was down on points, but we had worked out that a semi-decent card draw would mean either I won by 2 points, the game was a tie, or he won by 2 points. He drew, and the cards were giving us a tie. So he took a risk, spent a CP to redraw, and managed to get area denial, which just pushed him over the edge to win by 2 points, 54 to 56. And honestly, it was the perfect way to end the game, which had been so close thus far. Before he drew his cards, we shook hands because we knew that the outcome of the game didn't actually matter. It was just so good and a truly heroic battle between 2 awesome forces. So thank you, Travis, for that wonderful game. After game 2, we were brought on a boat trip to see some dolphins, which was a great way to spend the afternoon. We got some sunshine, we saw some cool animals, and we had a laugh while we sailed around. But then it was back to the tables, and I was playing into Chris and his Chaos Space Marines. Chris is an awesome dude and made me laugh so much that my stomach hurt. He brought a mixed arms chaos force with lots of guns and some very potent combat in the form of a big chosen brick and legionnaires led by a lord. There was a Vindicator, a Land Raider, and a Forge Fiend to contend with too, so it was certainly a thematic but actually quite scary force. And we were playing on a wicked Lava Manufactorum board, which really suited 2 Chaos armies facing into each other. I went first here, and I pushed up the mid with the Scorpion, who had a little bit of a whiffer in its shooting phase, only dealing 1 wound to Chris's Vindicator. My Jackals started terraforming on the flank, and I staged the rest of my army as best as I could. Chris put everything into the Scorpion in his turn, and absolutely smashed it in the shooting phase, which then proceeded to blow up. And for those of you who don't know, the Scorpion does 2d6 mortal wounds when it explodes, so it did a whopping amount of wounds to my army, and also Chris's Chosen, who had positioned to charge the Scorpion. In a way, this actually didn't really suit Chris, as he had wanted to get those Chosen in to move up the board and become a bulwark for his army. On my hitback, I pushed the Exalted Brick in, who easily picked up the Chosen, and my Zerks charged his Land Raider on the flank, taking it down to a couple of wounds. My Demon Prince positioned behind the Exalted to give them that sweet invulnerable save boost, and I basically clenched my cheeks for his hitback. Chris made one crucial mistake in his response here, shooting his Obliterators into my Berserkers, and while he did manage to kill 4 of them, they were able to surge into his legionnaires and lord, and then picked most of them up. This allowed my Exalted to then rampage into his gun line on my turn and lock down his army in his deployment zone. And while the following turns did see the Obliterators slowly chew through the bulk of my remaining units, it was too little too late, and I kept Chris penned in for long enough. So in the end, I scored the win there with an 80-61 score. After game 3, we all went out for a group dinner where we shared war stories and got to know each other a little bit better. And about halfway through the dinner, unbeknownst to me, pairings went up. And I found out because about halfway up the table, Mikkel, better known as Augustus Brass on Instagram, let out a shout of blood for the blood god, which meant only one thing. The legendary mirror match was on the cards for Battle Round 4. Going to no retreat, Mikkel was one of the people I was really hoping to play against. He's been on the Red Path before, one of the guests on All Around the World Leaders, and since then we had been chatting on and off about various hobby things. He does seem to be the glue which kind of keeps the no retreat vibe together, and his energy is unmatched. He also has probably one of the sexiest World Leader armies in existence, so getting to play him was a real privilege. Mikkel had brought a brilliant list, which had a Land Raider, a Predator Annihilator, as well as lots and lots of 8-bound, Exalted 8-bound, Berserkers, Mo, and Khorne. I knew this was going to be a really tough game. The mirror match, as we know, is like a beautiful dance or a chess game where one wrong move can cost the whole thing. But here, Mikkel had more units than me and better units with which to trade. We were playing on a really cool jungle-style crash ship board which presented a maze of obstacles that had to be navigated by both of our forces. So Mikkel ended up going first, which was actually quite good for me as it forced him to move out. I'd position my Scorpion and Slaughterer on one flank, confident that they could take the firepower of the Land Raider and Predator, with my Zerks on the opposite flank facing down his Mo and my Exalted and Prince in the middle. Mikkel put his Land Raider into the Scorpion and did some wounds before crippling the Slaughterer with his Predator. He pushed his Zerks up onto the flank objective and his 8-bound into the middle. I had actually rolled really poorly on my blood dice and I was only able to get a single buff up and had taken feel no pain. This meant that I couldn't retaliate aggressively to his push, which was quite problematic. In my turn 1, I moved the Scorpion up and pushed my Slaughterer very far in, looking for a charge into his Predator. I lined up my Jackals and Berserkers to charge his Master of Executions, thinking that I could get the Jackals to tag most of the Zerkers and the Mo so that his fight first would be neutered due to the forced fighting into my chaff, allowing me to deal with his Mo relatively easily. I kept my Exalted Brick and Prince back as I was reluctant to leave them vulnerable to his counter-assault. The Scorpion gunned into his Berserkers and managed to take 4 of them out, but when it came to the charge phase, my Berserkers failed their charge after the Jackals had made it in, meaning I wasn't able to deal with the Mo and I lost the Jackal squad for nothing. This was really bad, as my Scorpion also failed the charge and my Slaughterer left the Predator alive on a couple of wounds. Mikkel capitalized really well on this poor position for me. He brought Khorne and 10 Berserkers into the Scorpion, and with the combined shooting from the Land Raider and combat from them, he easily brought it down, though it did fight in death, again, and picked up a handful of Berserkers. His Mo remained on the objective, baiting me in and forcing my hand. Elsewhere, he brought in a chunk of reinforcements and started threatening my deployment zone. I did also rapidly rest my Exalted 8-bound in a pretty desperate gamble to attack his home field and draw attention away, but at this point I was facing a really tough board position. However, this is kind of where I started to get a little bit lucky. I whittled down his Berserkers with a combined shooting and grenade, so when I charged into them, the fight first wasn't too bad. I did lose my Mo and a few Berserkers, but my Mo fought on death, because of course he did, and took out the remainder of Mikkel's Berserkers, while I managed to keep 6 of my own alive. Invocatus flanked around on the right and got stuck into that area, while my Exalted Deep Strikers harassed the backfield and my Exalted Brick and Prince took the middle of the board. Mikkel again responded very well, flipping my home field objective in his favour and sweeping my Exalted Brick off the board with Khorne and the boys. But, you guessed it, they fought on death and killed all of them but Khorne. My Prince was locked in combat with his 8-bound brick as well, which he eventually did manage to push through, but the real swing was when Mikkel sent 3 8-bound back to deal with my Exalted 8-bound Deep Strikers, and through a series of honestly insane dice, only managed to kill 2 of them, who fought on death and picked up the squad. So keeping one guy alive was a huge point swing, as he was able to go on and score me swathes of primary and secondary points from that position. In the end, it was another brutal slogfest, but thanks to that pivotal combat going my way in the back, I was able to eke out enough points to push the win, and secured it, 75 to 59. Mikkel is an incredible individual, and this summary of our game doesn't at all capture our energy, our laughs and the banter that we had. To be lucky enough to play him was more than enough for me, regardless of the outcome of the game. And if you're not already following him on Instagram, get on it, you'll see some truly unique world leaders there. At this point in the event, we're going into the final round, and there's only one undefeated player, none other than Lawrence Baker from Tabletop Tactics with his Emperor's Children. There was also 5 people on a 3-1 record, including me, but 2 of them were Travis and Steven from my earlier rounds, so I wasn't going to be playing them again. This meant there was a pretty reasonable chance I ended up pairing up, and that's exactly what happened. And ordinarily, I don't like pairing up, especially in the final round, but in this case, I'm playing against someone who I've wanted to play against since I got back into this hobby 6 years ago. Tabletop Tactics have been an inspiration for me in so many ways and have produced endlessly good content, so to be able to play Lawrence in the last round of what had already been an amazing event was easily the cherry on this very stacked cake. Of course, this match is a funny one because if I beat Lawrence, I'm likely to win the event or podium high, and if I lose, I'll drop deeper into the rankings. In any other event, this would be a pretty big deal for me, but when I walked up to the table, I pretty much immediately felt all that vanish as the spirit of no retreat took over. Lawrence was bringing his Emperor's Children, a beautiful custom army done by Siege Studios, which has oodles of Noise Marines, Dreadnoughts, Predators, and Lucius. It wasn't a good matchup for me, since he had a lot more units and I was always going to struggle to score, so I needed to apply some first turn pressure very quickly. However, I ended up going second, and Lawrence dumped his whole army into the Scorpion. Since he was playing the Veterans of the Long War detachment, he marked my Scorpion, basically giving them Oath of Moment rerolls, and through pretty much his entire shooting phase, just managed to bring it down. However, immediately losing Big Mama put me in a pretty tough situation. I did push out where I could, but losing that momentum meant that I had to spend a turn positioning and maneuvering, especially as I didn't roll up Advance and Charge on the blood dice. I couldn't really get stuck in until turn 2, which essentially gave him another solid turn of scoring, shooting, and positioning. Hilariously, in Lawrence's turn 2, my Lord Invocatus took almost the same amount of shots as the Scorpion, but managed to live on a wound thanks to some stupid save rolls on my part, but was humiliated by a tank-shocking Rhino, which killed him. I was finally able to get stuck in then and pushed into his lines a bit. My Berserkers pushed the right flank and my 8-bound got into the middle, tagging a Rhino along with my Demon Prince and Bloodslaughter, and after the 2 of them killed the Rhino, the Exalted 8-bound pushed into Noise Marines, which I then picked up. Meanwhile, on my flank, my Deep Struck 8-bound got stuck into a Predator, which they eventually killed and tied up some more assets. I'd managed to slightly recover my board position, but deep striking Raptors in my backlines provided a problem that I had no answers to, and they swiftly curtailed my primary scoring. My Exalted managed to stand up against a solid amount of firepower, which then took some pressure off my Berserkers, who managed to chop up several assets on the right flank. But my Exalted on the left got locked in a nasty duel with a Hellbrute and eventually ended up deleting each other. Lawrence also cunningly evaded my Demon Prince to prevent some secondary scoring, and sadly in the end, I just ran out of resources as I was cut down in a hail of sonic waves. Because there was so much dice to roll on both sides, we only managed to get into the end of Battle Round 3 before time was called, and Lawrence got the win, 55 to 44. But if we managed to get further into the game, it would have been a true slaughter, and I'm sure he would have topped out closer to 100 points, so that close score isn't really representative of the absolute battering that I took. That said, it was probably the most fun game of 40k I've ever played. I'm going to sound like a fangirl, but it really was quite special to be able to play against someone who has been a big inspiration for both my own army and making content in general. Lawrence was a blast at the tabletop, and we cracked jokes throughout the entire game. His ability to roll 6s is definitely real, and being on the receiving end of it is an experience, though my ridiculous save rolls with Invocatus kind of balanced the scales. I went into that game feeling pretty nervous because of what it was, but Lawrence immediately broke down the barrier, and very quickly we were both just having a lot of banter and fun. In the end, The result doesn't even matter a little bit to me, much like the rest of the games that I played. What I'm going to remember is the experience, the stupid silly moments, and the crazy energy from both of us. So let's move on now to how it all finished up and the award ceremony. One of the best moments throughout the entire weekend was the award ceremony. Normally, most tournaments have a relatively quiet ceremony as a lot of people tend to leave before it and they can be a little bit subdued. However, No Retreat was completely different. We all got together in the hall with glasses of cava, our plus ones joined us, and the SN team put on a great show. There were tons of awards to give out, and the majority of them were painting ones. There was awards for the best character, the best unit, vehicle, army, and a host of others. Going into it, I knew I wasn't likely to win a painting award since the general standard was so high, but I was quietly hoping for something, and unfortunately that wasn't to be. But one thing that I totally loved was every time someone did get an award, the whole room was so hyped for them, as we all recognized the hard work and worthy achievement of that person. It was honestly impossible to feel slighted in the face of such gorgeous artwork, and the paint judges must have had a really tough time selecting their favorites from such a stacked lineup. I do not envy them that job one little bit. Ordinarily, if I don't win a painting prize at a tournament, I usually get a sense of failure, but at No Retreat all I felt was love for my fellow attendees who had put in so much work and deserved every prize that they got. It also served as a brilliant motivator for me. I feel driven now to skill up and get better so I can come back and aim for a painting prize next time. However, I did manage to come away with one award, which really means a lot to me. I won the Player's Player award, meaning I was chosen as the best opponent to play against for the tournament. And this one is really special to me, as I always worry about being a good opponent and ensuring that my opponent has fun against me, so to win that in a field of such incredible human beings really is something that I'm honestly more proud of than most of my Best Painted Army awards that I've received. The trophy has already taken pride of place on the top of my desk and honestly encapsulates just how amazing the whole event was. It will forever be a memento of the vibes and positivity brought by everyone there. And of course there has to be a shout out to Lawrence, who took overall first place, and my other opponents Stephen and Travis, who got third and fourth. In the end, I finished 3-2 and got 8th place, which, as we all know, is actually the best position for a world leader, so really it was me who won. And once the awards concluded, we all went out for what I found out was called Pina Colada Sunday before the big journey home. Writing this video and recording it now, I'm reliving a weekend that was truly unforgettable. I want to extend a heartfelt thanks to SN for hosting such an amazing tournament and creating one of the most intoxicating atmospheres I've ever been part of. I want to shout out everyone who attended No Retreat, all the chats we had, drinks we shared, and memories we made. I definitely won't forget any of it, except the conversations on Sunday after one too many drinks, which have already been erased from my brain. To my opponents, Stephen, Travis, Chris, Mikkel, and Lawrence, you are all incredible human beings and absolute paragons of what this hobby should be. May we meet again on another battlefield. Before we close it out, I'm going to do a short Patreon Q&A section. In our Patreon Discord channel, I asked you all to give me questions about No Retreat, so I'll cover those now before we close the video. So first up is Dreadboss, who wants to know how the inclusion of Legends changed the event, if it did at all. And I think that's a good question, one which pertains to a bigger overall question of if Legends should be allowed in events in general. For me, it massively deepened the unit pool that the world leaders have to choose from, which as we all know is quite limited when Legends isn't available. It also allowed me to bring the Greater Brass Scorpion, which otherwise, honestly, would probably never have been finished painting or seen the tabletop. So in that sense, it made a massive impact for me. Outside of that, I don't know if it had a big ramification on the event itself. Everyone approaches No Retreat with a very open mind, and I'd like to think that none of my opponents had a problem with me using legend choices. Obviously there is a balance issue, and me using the Scorpion doesn't mean that all legend units are then fair and fine to use, but I do think it's a massive shame that so many awesome looking models can't be seen at more events. I do think that allowing legends works because of what No Retreat is. The more relaxed atmosphere means that no one is trying to find the most broken interaction possible in their legend pool, and I'm sure that if Legends was more widely available, it would be a problem for the general scene. So I guess in general, I don't think it really affected the overall event, but on a personal level, it affected my list composition massively. Streaking Grime Jack wants to know what other legend units I would consider taking. And again, it's another pretty interesting question. Initially, I was actually looking at the classic choice for me and bringing the termite drills. They still seem to have relatively decent stats, though they are a touch expensive. However, it's a very interesting transport option for world eaters, and I imagine with rapid ingress, they would be quite good. I also looked at Leviathans, but they seemed a little expensive for what they do. In the end, bringing the Scorpion and Slaughter wasn't about picking good competitive units for the army, and in fact, both of them performed very poorly throughout the weekend. I don't think the Slaughter got a single kill, and I do think that that's actually kind of important. If you're attending an event that does allow legends, you should probably bring something that you think is cool or is close to your heart, instead of trying to find a unit which has a powerful combo or gotcha ability. DJ then wants to know what my favourite and least favourite things about the event was. This is a tough one, as there is a lot to love about No Retreat, but honestly, the thing which stands out as the best was the atmosphere of camaraderie and friendship. It really felt like everyone was there for the same reason, and that we all just wanted to have the best time possible. It made for some unforgettable moments. Everything about the event was brilliant, but I do have to say that sense of community is what stood out most to me. And in terms of my least favourite thing, honestly, it was the travel there and back. It's pretty awkward to get to Gibraltar if you're not flying from the UK, so it ended up being a full day of travel on both days. And this was further complicated by the fact that my fiancée Audrey fractured her ankle fighting people in the previous weekend, but thankfully we did make it there safely. Journeying back was tough, as I was dealing with a big come down from the weekend and it was a long trip. But ultimately, I don't think there was anything about the event itself which I would say I actually disliked, which really says something. Finally, Scott Grant wants to know when we can expect my guest appearance on Tabletop Tactics. And while I don't have an answer for you, I will give a tangential reply, which I think will actually give all of you a bit of insight on what you can expect from me for the next while on the Red Path. I mentioned earlier that No Retreat has fundamentally changed my outlook on 40k, and I really do mean that. Part of that change is that I'm now looking at regular tournaments in a new light and sort of reevaluating how much I actually enjoy them. Now, this doesn't mean I'm going to stop attending tournaments, of course, but I might change the level of events I do attend. We already have Brian here who is doing amazingly in the competitive scene, and it does feel like my input in comparison is not as valuable as his. I'm starting to consider if I should be aiming for more casual events like No Retreat and maybe making content themed around those, but I haven't made any final decisions yet, and would love to hear your feedback on this, so let me know in the comments down below. Suffice to say, I do have plans to attend some really fun events in the next year, and hopefully I'll get to No Retreat again, so I guess we'll just have to see where that takes us. But for now, it's about time that we wrap this video up. Once again, if you want to know more about No Retreat, check out the links below or visit SN Battle Reports. I can't recommend this event enough. It was miles above any other tournament I've attended, and I will most certainly be doing my best to get invited again. Of course, a final thanks to our Patreons for supporting the Red Path and allowing me to get to these awesome tournaments. If you want to be part of that community, you can check out the links in the description below and see what we have on offer. I have so much motivation and drive to hobby and create, so expect to see a ramp up of content in the next couple of months from me. Brian is attending a slew of tournaments, including the World Championships of Warhammer, and I've got a couple in November, but I'll be working on a host of hobby tutorials between then and now. Lastly, thank you so much, SN, for putting on what is quite frankly the best event in the world. Thank you to everyone who attended for being amazing people, and thank you to all my opponents for making me laugh more than I have in quite a while. So let's shut this one down, folks. Again, thank you for watching, and let me know what you thought about this video in the comments down below. Until the next one, I've been Dara, you've been watching The Red Path, so stay healthy, stay safe, and kill, maim, burn.